It's Thursday. It's the 3rd of July. I'm Conn-young. This is Arirang News live from Seoul. Our top stories today. Chinese President Xi Jinping and First Lady Peng Liyuan arrive in Seoul for a two-day state visit. President Park Geun-hye will welcome the first couple at the nation's top office, where the two leaders are set to hold a bilateral summit. Now, the events in Seoul over the next 2 days will be watched closely by all parties with interests in the Northeast Asian region, but Washington has so far been the only one to make any official remarks on the Chinese president's visit to South Korea. And the Japanese Prime Minister says his government will lift some of its sanctions on North Korea in response to Pyongyang's decision to create a committee to investigate the fate of Japanese nationals abducted by the North in the 1970s and 80s. We'll have those stories and more, but first, let's begin right here in Seoul. Now, Chinese President Xi Jinping arrived in Seoul just about 2 hours ago for his two-day state visit. President Park Geun-hye is scheduled to hold summit talks with him later this afternoon, after which the two leaders will release a joint statement alongside a press conference. For details, let's go over to our presidential office correspondent Choi You-sun. She is live on the line with us. You-sun.
Hi, Conn-young. President Xi Jinping and First Lady Peng Liyuan landed in Seoul just before lunchtime. The South Korean presidential office is emphasizing that President Park and President Xi's special friendship was a key factor behind his state visit to Seoul. It's the first time a Chinese leader has come to South Korea before paying a visit to Beijing's traditional ally North Korea and neighboring Japan. Presidents Park and Xi, who first met in 2005, have made strong impressions on each other. And since both of them took office last year, they have met 4 times. The two presidents will meet for a summit later this afternoon, after which they'll hold a joint press conference. Tomorrow, Friday that is, here in Seoul, President Xi will meet the National Assembly Speaker, the Prime Minister, and also address hundreds of students at Seoul National University. Presidents Park and Xi will also appeal to businessmen from both countries at an investors forum tomorrow on Friday. And the Chinese First Lady is scheduled to take part in a series of cultural events in the Korean capital. Conn-young?
All right, so this is the first time for Xi Jinping as the president of China to visit the Korean peninsula. What are some of the key issues, You-sun, that are expected to top the agenda for the talks between the two leaders?
President Xi's decision to visit Seoul first before Pyongyang will certainly put more pressure on the North Korean regime to lay down its nuclear weapons and return to negotiations. Now, the question is exactly how the two leaders today will deliver their positions in a joint statement following their summit. Also topping the two leaders' agenda for the talks will be Tokyo's retreat from a historical apology to Seoul and its attempts to expand its military presence. Beijing, which is locked in a bitter territorial dispute with Tokyo, is expected to seek greater cooperation with Seoul on historical issues, but it's unlikely Presidents Park and Xi will specifically target Japan. The amicable relationship between Seoul and Beijing and their mutual mistrust of Tokyo is not a welcoming dynamic for Washington, which is looking to expand its influence in Asia. On the economic front, the leaders of Korea and China will agree to speed up their FTA negotiations and set up a trade market for their respective currencies. I'm Choi You-sun reporting on Chinese President Xi Jinping's state visit to Seoul, and I'll be back with more details in our next newscast.
Now, President Xi offered his thoughts on the upcoming summit in a piece that appeared in Korea's major daily newspapers on this Thursday. The written contribution, which encourages greater cooperation between Seoul and Beijing and expresses high hopes for the summit, echoes the sentiments voiced by President Park a day earlier during her interview with Chinese broadcaster CCTV. Our Liyuan reports.
Chinese President Xi Jinping begins his piece with a traditional Korean saying, "It only costs 3 straw bags to buy a house, but 1,000 to get a good neighbor," emphasizing the importance of having good neighbors. He goes on to say that Seoul and Beijing have been able to build a healthy relationship based on trust, adding the two should always be able to freely exchange opinions on areas of mutual interest. President Xi also calls economic cooperation the main focal point of Korea-China relations and says China is aiming to expand its economic ties with Seoul through speedy negotiations on their bilateral FTA. As for his visit to Seoul, he writes that he hopes the two leaders will share friendship, discuss cooperation, and preserve peace. His words were echoed a day earlier by Korean President Park Geun-hye during an interview with China's CCTV, where she expressed hope that the visit will bring relations between the two to a new high.
이번에 시 주석님의 방한도 더욱 그 내실화 있는 결실을 많이 거둬서 두 나라 관계의 신뢰와 또 우호 관계가 더욱 깊어지리라 그렇게 생각합니다.
When asked about Korea's ongoing historical dispute with Japan, President Park simply said Tokyo needs to have a correct understanding of history. She also accused Tokyo of trying to undermine the 1993 Kono Statement, which was its official apology for forcing roughly 200,000 women into sexual slavery during World War II.
국가 간의 신뢰를 저버리는 일이고 또 국제사회의 그 준엄한 그런 그 어떤 목소리를 무시하는 그런 행위라고 생각을 합니다. 그래서 일본은 이제라도 어떻게 역사의 수레바퀴를 되돌릴 수는 도저히 없는 것이기 때문에
Japan's recent attempts to revise history and economic cooperation between China and Korea will top the agenda of the summit between the two leaders. Liyuan, Arirang News.
Now, on the sidelines of their summit in Seoul later this Thursday, Korea and China are expected to ink a deal to allow direct trading of their local currencies. The agreement will slash transaction costs for companies on both sides of the West Sea and reduce foreign exchange risks. Here's our Kim Ji-yeon.
Korea and China have been trying to settle their exports and imports in their own currencies in light of their growing trade. China is Korea's largest trading partner, while Korea is China's third largest trading partner. Last year, the trade volume between the two countries totaled $230 billion, with Korea posting a $63 billion surplus. Up until now, only 1% of Korean companies settle their trading bills with their Chinese partners directly in the Chinese yuan, because only those already holding enough yuan could do so. Under the currency deal, exporters and importers from the two countries will no longer have to pay transaction fees when converting the won to the yuan, and vice versa, since there's no need to convert into the US dollar. The new arrangement is expected to cut Korean traders' business costs by at least 3 to 5%. It would also help reduce potential exchange rate risk. A researcher at the Korea Capital Market Institute says the deal will make Korea's financial market more attractive to foreign investors as well.
The deal with China is expected to enhance Korea's financial and industrial brand image with the growing use of the yuan in international trade.
The global trade volume settled in the yuan amounted to 4.6 trillion yuan, or $741 billion last year, up 58% from a year earlier. In addition to the currency deal, China is reportedly considering allowing Korean financial institutions to invest directly in China's capital markets by granting them investment quotas of up to $13 billion. China has similar quota deals with Britain, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Well, the media spotlight is not just on President Xi, but also the First Lady, who is accompanying the president on his trip to Seoul. Well, she is almost as well known as her husband, if not even more popular in China, because she was a celebrity before and after becoming the First Lady. Her fashion style in particular has been making headlines around the world. All right, Song Ji-sun has more on China's First Lady.
She is the Michelle Obama of the world's second largest economy and has been referred to as the Carla Bruni of China for her past career in entertainment. It's Chinese First Lady Peng Liyuan, whose reputation within China is as large as that of her politician husband, Chinese President Xi Jinping. Unlike her predecessors, the former singer and performer has been outgoing and active in her role as China's First Lady. The world's 57th most powerful woman, according to Forbes magazine, is also a goodwill ambassador for the World Health Organization. Selected to the International Best Dressed by Vanity Fair magazine last year, everything Peng wears makes headlines in fashion magazines and immediately sells out. Peng is scheduled to visit palaces in the Korean capital and attend cultural events during her 2-day visit, and will be on her own for most of her itinerary while her husband holds talks. To show around the city, the presidential office of Cheongwade has tapped current senior secretary for political affairs Choi You-sun, who will serve as Peng's personal tour guide during her stay. 송지선, Arirang News.
The United States is keeping a close eye on the outcome of the Seoul-Beijing summit. Washington says it encourages countries in Northeast Asia to engage in dialogue, but U.S. officials declined to comment on whether they were concerned that South Korea and China were getting too close. At a regular press briefing Wednesday, the State Department spokesperson Jen Psaki said both countries are important key partners to the United States and that Washington will wait to hear what the two leaders had to say at the conclusion of their meeting. Let's take a listen.
We also encourage dialogue between countries in the region, and we've long encouraged the strong and peaceful rise and prosperity of China. So we'll see what comes out of the dialogue tomorrow, and certainly, we'll encourage meetings moving forward.
Well, Japan, on the other hand, has not made any official remarks on the Chinese president's visit to South Korea, but it did have something to say regarding North Korea, that it will relax some of its sanctions on the North as the reclusive state begins to reinvestigate the fate of at least a dozen Japanese nationals who were abducted by Pyongyang in the 1970s and 80s. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe told reporters today that North Korea's special committee is fully authorized to launch an effective probe into any organization. Well, the sanctions to be lifted reportedly include travel curbs and restrictions on money transfers and a ban on port calls by North Korean ships. These sanctions are separate from those imposed by Japan and the international community following North Korea's nuclear tests. Meanwhile, a North Korean citizen has reportedly defected to a South Korean border island on this Thursday. A South Korean military source said an unarmed North Korean man, presumed to be a civilian, expressed his desire to defect to the south after arriving in a wooden boat on Peng Island earlier this morning. Well, the source said the man is currently under investigation by related authorities. An official at the Unification Ministry said he could be a fisherman, considering that he arrived on Peng Island.
All of the day's important events close to home and around the world. Join Moon Conn-young live from Seoul.
Mobile shopping market for the dual use of the Korean name East Sea and Japanese name Sea of Japan in school textbooks in the state of Virginia. Following the April ferry disaster that left more than a sum of 300 people dead, the Park Geun-hye administration drew up plans to reorganize the government with a focus on safety issues. Her plans are now facing opposition, but which side will prevail? Here's our Kim Young-gil.
President Park Geun-hye has vowed to disband the Korea Coast Guard over its poor handling of rescue operations as the Seoul ferry sank. In its place, the president wants to create a new government body charged with safety and rescue affairs under the office of the prime minister, which would serve as the control tower in future disaster situations. Under the plan, the Coast Guard and the National Emergency Management Agency will be absorbed into a new government agency on national safety. But the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy has already registered its objections to the plan. Instead, it has proposed keeping the Coast Guard and the National Emergency Management Agency intact and establishing a full-fledged safety-related ministry. It also suggested the National Security Council under the presidential office become the control tower of all disaster and safety-related issues instead of the Prime Minister's office. Under the NPAD plan, the Coast Guard and the National Emergency Management Agency would still be responsible for safety issues, including rescue work at sea and on land. The party is also calling for a removal of the Coast Guard's authority over investigations and intelligence gathering on land. However, the ruling Saenuri Party is unlikely to give in to the NPAD's demands. It says the opposition's opinions will be heard, but that more weight must be given to the government's plan. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
Well, this here shouldn't come as a big surprise, but it's an interesting indication of the sentiment here in Korea following that ferry disaster back in April. The number of people taking trips by ship tumbled at 26% in May from a year earlier. Seoul's Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries says that's a drop from nearly 2 million to 1.5 million passengers. Now, in particular, the number of ferry passengers to Korea's southernmost Jeju Island plunged 47%. The ill-fated Seoul ferry was en route to the resort island when it sank off Korea's southwestern coast. The ministry attributes the overall drop to public fear of ferry travel after the tragedy, but also to the Seoul's operator Cheonghaejin Marine Company being suspended from operating the Incheon-Jeju route. Well, it appears Korea's head coach Hong Myung-mo will stay in his job despite a disappointing Brazil World Cup, which saw the team have its worst result in 16 years with 1 draw and 2 losses, yes, without a single win. In a press conference Thursday, the Korea Football Association said it was not fair to heap all the blame on Hong for not achieving their widely stated goal of advancing to the knockout stages. Hong will likely remain in the role until his contract expires after next year's Asian Cup. Appointed to lead the national team less than 1 year before the World Cup, Hong came under fire for selecting players he's worked with closely in the past, despite their poor form or lack of match time at their clubs. The former defender who helped Korea place 4th at the 2002 World Cup took charge of the younger squad back in the late 2000s, leading them to the bronze at the 2012 London Olympics. A theatrical performance dealing with the horrors faced by the Korean victims of Japan's systematic wartime sex slavery has opened here in Korea. Well, the drama's Japanese creator says the Japanese government cannot have a clear conscience accusing the victims of being liars when there's so much evidence to prove otherwise. Here's our cultural correspondent Park Ji-won.
In this monologue play, former wartime sex slave Young Ja recounts her life story. When she was young, Korea was under the Japanese colonial rule, and she was sent to Japan thinking she was going to work in a factory. Upon her arrival, however, she was forced into sexual slavery. She was just 14 years old. The play's creator says the piece is titled Liar Young Ja, as it accuses the Japanese government of making former sex slaves liars.
Through the play, I aim to criticize the Abe administration. As you can see on this stage backdrop, I posted the face of Prime Minister Abe to criticize the administration's recent moves.
80-year-old veteran Japanese playwright Fujita Asaya says he wanted to tell the truth with a play that's written based on facts and research, as he couldn't bear to watch the Japanese government conceal the obvious truth. Despite threats from far-right extremists in Japan, the play was performed in 1995. But Asaya is furious that nothing much changed in almost 2 decades.
It's basically the same as 20 years ago. In fact, the situation in Japan has gotten worse. I'm so angry. I want the Korean people to know that there are many more angry Japanese people like myself.
The monodrama will be staged in major cities in Korea this year and will be put on stage in China later this year. Asaya plans to take the show to other countries as well, including the Philippines and Japan, and some European countries in the years to come. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Well, let's shift our focus now to other aspects of the arts and culture scene in Seoul, And in particular, our Im Yoon-hee today brings us a very special photo exhibition that just recently opened here in Seoul. Good afternoon to you, Yoon-hee.
Good afternoon.
So the Pulitzer Prize winners are here.
Right, so the Pulitzer Prize has a photo exhibition available here. Now, this highly esteemed award is given by the Pulitzer Prize Board, and it's based on individuals they choose who display excellence in the field of journalism and fine arts. Now, in the photography division of this award, the winners are usually chosen a year after the photo is taken, and as you'll see in just a bit, there are some very powerful images. Take a look.
With the click of a button, a moment in time is captured and forever preserved, to be remembered by those within the image, but also to be shared with the rest of the world. That's the motto here. Almost 50 years of history to be shared as winners of the esteemed Pulitzer Prize.
Joseph Pulitzer was a legend in journalism, and before passing, he created a will so that people would be recognized and awarded within journalism. A portion of the money he allotted was put towards assembling this photojournalist gallery, and through this exhibition, you can see the biggest events of the year. For example, this year, you can see the major events of 2013.
There are over 230 different pictures, illustrating the last 50 or so years of our civilization. Years of war and disaster, family and love. The exhibition has made its round in Korea before, but this time they've expanded, bringing in additional works from the winning artists. They've created series of events through their pictures, where the viewer can get not just a glimpse of a moment, but a look at a time. Between the categories of breaking news and feature photography, the stories here range across the scope.
In 1942, the prize was first awarded. Then in 1968, they started awarding 2 prizes for photography. These are this year's winners. And here you can see a victim of the Boston Marathon bombing. This man was waiting for his girlfriend at the finish line, and then the attack happened, so he lost both legs. But the beautiful thing is his girlfriend waited for him after, and now they're married. It's interesting how this picture at first glance looks like Jesus on the cross.
It's not just the pros that are accepted into this Hall of Fame. This picture shows a fireman rescuing this child. A picture taken by your everyday heroes. Because it's everyone's world to share, and it's everyone's moment to capture.
You know, I think I have great respect for those photojournalists because one great photo could just mean 1,000 words, really. And these are some very incredible photos by very brave journalists who were who they put their, sometimes lives out there and to take these photographs. Now, what else does this exhibition feature?
Right, so this exhibition is very unique. It features not only photos, but also a video portion that shows an interview with a lot of the photographers and a behind-the-scenes look at basically the story behind the picture. And so that's a very unique aspect of this exhibition. That is very interesting and, really brings the photo to life.
Now, with the 2 categories, breaking news and feature photography, I noticed some photos from the Korean War.
Exactly. So they actually have a very special part of this exhibition in honor of the Korean War. And so they have some very special photos by one of the award-winning photographers, Max Desfour. There are a total of 45 additional photographs by this photographer that are being exhibited. It's titled The Forgotten War, and the exhibition captures the people and their lives here in Korea. Now, one of the most chilling photographs of this exhibition you're about to see is this one with, it's a prisoner of war with his hands bound, and you can kind of see a hole where he was probably trying to breathe. And so this image of, haunting death, it's really an image that was widespread across the nation that Korea really had to deal with and left a lot of scars.
Right, very, very powerful images. You mentioned that this isn't the first time this exhibition has been here.
Right, so the first time it came in 1998, and it was hugely popular drew in hundreds of thousands of people. And this time around, they do expect it to be just as popular. You know, it's a very touching exhibition that people do enjoy going to see.
Right, and it's something that we all, I think, need to go and see to see what kind of what kind of news and what kind of developments have happened in the past decade or so over the years, and definitely a very powerful exhibition. And we have until September to catch this, right?
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you, Yoon-hee, for that very interesting report.
Always a pleasure.
Well, that's just about all from me at this hour. I'm Moon Conn-young. Check back with us at 4 p.m. Korea time for Business Today.